The first video hit my inbox at 3:04 a.m. I'm a digital archivist, a fancy way of saying I spend my nights sifting through obscure, often deleted corners of the internet. I search for lost media, forgotten history, and, most lucratively, the dark detritus that major platforms scrub clean, extremist broadcasts, niche crime footage, the kind of things people pay a premium to see, or to simply know exist. I run a very quiet, very profitable service called The Gravedigger. This video, however, wasn't a job. It was sent from an email address that was pure static, a meaningless, random string of characters. The subject line was simply, feed. I clicked it, expecting a virus or spam. Instead, a video player opened. There was no title card, no introduction, just immediate footage. It was a fixed camera shot, like a dusty, low-quality security cam, pointed at the corner of a dimly lit, empty bedroom. The walls were peeling beige wallpaper, the floor a stained carpet. The only furniture visible was a tall, old wooden dresser with a massive, ornamental mirror leaning against it. The timestamp in the corner read a date from 3 days ago. Nothing happened for the first 20 minutes. The silence was heavy, broken only by the low, constant hiss of the camera's analog hum. I was about to close it when the glitch happened. The air in the room, which had been still, seemed to shudder. Not the camera itself, the air. The image didn't distort, it shifted. Everything in the frame, the wallpaper pattern, the dust motes hanging still, the edge of the dresser, all of it moved 3 inches to the left, and then snapped back instantly. It was a visual hiccup, a perfect, impossible displacement that lasted maybe a quarter of a second. A flicker of light appeared in the mirror. I leaned closer. The mirror on the dresser was old, its glass slightly warped. It showed a perfect, if slightly distorted, reflection of the room. But in the very center of the reflected glass, a tiny, bright dot of white light appeared. It looked like a single pixel, impossibly sharp against the gloom. It stayed there, unmoving, for another 10 minutes. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, it began to grow. Not spreading out, but deepening, like a point of pure light being drilled into the glass. It wasn't reflecting anything. It was in the reflection. Suddenly, the whole frame glitched again, that impossible, sideways snap and return. When it snapped back, the light in the mirror was gone. But standing right in front of the dresser, where the empty carpet had been a moment before, was a figure. It was tall, thin, and absolutely motionless. It wore what looked like old, grease-stained work coveralls and a heavy, featureless hood that obscured its face completely. The fabric of the coveralls seemed to absorb the light, making the figure a pure, black silhouette against the drab background. I froze. This was good. This was professional-grade creepypasta footage, staged, clearly, but with a unique visual trick in the glitch that was unnervingly effective. I figured I'd found the next big viral horror stunt. I started a screen recording for my archives. The figure stood for 5 minutes, its head bowed. The camera hummed. The timestamp ticked, then, the second, and more crucial, hook, the figure slowly, agonizingly, raised its head. It looked directly at the camera, and it was looking at me, but there was no face. Just the bottom of the rough, heavy hood. And stitched right into the center of where a mouth should be was a single, horizontal strip of coarse, off-white cloth. It looked like a gag, crudely sewn to the hood itself. The moment it looked at me, the audio cut out completely. The static hiss stopped. Total silence. A sound returned, but it wasn't from the camera's microphone. It was a low, mechanical clicking noise, rhythmic and dry, like old clockwork winding down, or perhaps, like a very large, empty pair of jaws opening and closing, very slowly. Click. 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 The figure lifted its hand. The movement was unnatural, a series of staccato, jerky stops and starts, as if it were moving through treacle. Its fingers were long and black, like bare tree branches that it pointed directly at the camera, and the clicking stopped, then, another, massive glitch, this time, the shift was violent. The entire image snapped not just left and right, but forward, a terrifying, momentary lurch that made my stomach drop, as if the camera had plunged toward the floor. When it settled, the figure was gone, the room was empty again. The light in the mirror was gone. The old, familiar hiss of the camera's low-quality audio returned, the timestamp in the corner flashed a new date. It was the current day. The time, 3:15 a.m. that I looked at my own clock. It was 3:15 a.m., the video hadn't been recorded 3 days ago. It was live. And it had glitched out of the past and into my present that I played the screen recording back instantly, needing to confirm what I'd seen. When I got to the point where the figure pointed, a notification popped up on my desktop. It was a new email from the same static address. The subject line was, "You saw." The body of the email contained only one thing, a single, black and white JPEG that it was a picture taken from a high angle, looking down. It showed the top of a wooden dresser, the edge of a warped, ornamental mirror. And on the surface of the dresser, sitting right beside my open laptop, was a single, long, black, twig-like finger that I looked up. The clicking sound was coming from the corner of my own room, near my own dresser. The air in my small office, usually stale and cold from the 2 humming servers, went instantly frigid. It wasn't the temperature of a winter night, it was the sharp, metallic cold of deep space that I didn't scream. I didn't even move the 2 feet required to knock my chair over and bolt. My eyes were fixed on the black and white JPEG on my screen, the single, long, impossibly slender finger resting beside my laptop, on my desk. Then, the clicking started again, closer now, behind my right shoulder, click. Click, that it was coming from the darkness surrounding my file cabinets, near the only window in the room that my brain finally caught up. This wasn't a viral prank. This wasn't some deepfake marvel. I had just witnessed an entity travel through a video feed, and it was standing 10 feet behind me that I slammed the laptop shut. The sudden darkness was a profound mistake, the movement was immediate. A sound like heavy, oil-soaked canvas dragging across the carpet, fast and uneven, lunged from the corner that I scrambled, finally, to the left, knocking over the aluminum stand that held my spare monitors. They crashed with a terrible, distracting sound. That noise bought me a fraction of a second. I dove under the desk, my hands searching blindly for the heavy steel flashlight I kept taped underneath, a relic from my days exploring abandoned server farms that I found the cold metal. I flipped the switch. A thick, blinding beam of light cut through the gloom. I angled it up, aiming for the area where the sound had come from. It was standing there. The hooded figure it was taller than I had estimated from the video, easily 7 feet, and utterly still. The light beam hit its coveralls, and instead of illuminating them, the light seemed to just disappear, swallowed by the coarse, black fabric. It was like staring at a hole in reality. The single detail that stood out, horrifyingly, was the stitched gag. In the beam of the flashlight, the coarse white thread looked like dried sinew pulled tight across the front of the hood. The figure didn't move toward me, or away. It stood over my desk, looking down at the now closed laptop, and then, I saw the finger. Not the one in the photo, but a new one. It had detached itself from the hand, and it was resting on the desk, right where the JPEG had shown it. It wasn't a finger, it was a piece of dead, dark wood, stripped clean of bark. The figure slowly, carefully, leaned its head down toward my closed laptop. I couldn't see anything under the hood, but I felt the absolute, crushing weight of its attention. The laptop, a powerful machine built for heavy rendering, began to whine. Not the fan, but a high-pitched electronic shriek, the sound of internal components being stressed far beyond their limits. A small, new message appeared on the laptop's closed lid. It wasn't projected light. It was a burn mark, bubbling the plastic surface in the shape of a single, crude symbol, an empty circle, with a single, sharp vertical line cutting through the middle that I needed to move. Now that I scrambled backward on my hands and knees, keeping the blinding flashlight fixed on the thing. It seemed to hate the light, or perhaps it was just indifferent, but it didn't advance. That I reached the doorway to the hall, slammed the office door shut, and bolted it, knowing full well a deadbolt wouldn't stop whatever that was. I ran to my main power panel and, without hesitation, ripped the main breaker down. The house plunged into darkness. The only light was the faint glow of the city outside and the beam of my flashlight. The shrieking from the office stopped instantly. Silence. Then, the rhythmic clicking resumed, this time coming from behind the office door, slow, measured, and infinitely patient. That I leaned against the cold wall, my breath ragged. That I am the gravedigger. I deal in the deep web's horrors. I know the rules of reality, the physical, the digital, and the criminal. This entity broke all of them. It didn't use the network like a hacker. It used the feed like a doorway. It wasn't a body being recorded, it was a signal being contained. And when the signal glitched, the container failed, and whatever was inside slipped into the physical world. The single, most terrifying realization hit me: the thing didn't glitch into my room. It glitched into the reflection of the room first. The mirror in that bedroom, the camera feed, my laptop screen, they were not images, they were entry points. Surfaces reflecting reality, giving the entity the necessary, momentary overlap to force its way through. That I had to understand how it worked. I had to know where it came from. Because if it could come here, it could go anywhere a camera was rolling. That I felt something cold and papery under my bare foot. I aimed the flashlight down. It was a piece of the wallpaper from the video, beige, peeling, with a faint, repeating floral pattern. It wasn't paper, it was dried human skin, thin as tissue, and taped to it was a small, crudely drawn map, a hand-drawn schematic of 3 distinct locations in a rough triangle, labeled with GPS coordinates. The center of the triangle, scrawled in thick, black ink that looked suspiciously like dried blood, was the symbol I'd seen burned into my laptop, a circle cut by a single vertical line. The clicking from behind the office door stopped. Total, dead silence. My adrenaline faded, replaced by cold, scientific curiosity. The figure had left a clue, a bait, an invitation. It wanted me to follow its signal back to its source. I pulled out my burner phone, ignoring the fresh layer of dried skin on my fingers. I typed in the first set of coordinates. I knew the place instantly. It was the address of an abandoned television transmission tower, shut down 20 years ago. The first node in what looked like a dark, broken broadcast network. I couldn't stay here. The clicking had stopped. That meant it wasn't waiting for me, it was moving. I looked down at the scrap of skin in my hand. It was brittle, dry, and cold. I had just stumbled into the graveyard of signals. I had to go to the source. The coordinates led me 30 miles north of the city, deep into the sprawling, neglected marshland where urban decay met the wilderness. The first location was an old, defunct television tower belonging to a forgotten local station, WNLZ-TV, the null line zone. I parked my beat-up, nondescript van a quarter-mile away and approached on foot, using the thick early morning fog for cover. The breaker was still down at my house, but I knew the hooded figure wasn't restricted by electricity. The dark just made it easier to see me. The tower itself was a skeleton of rust and twisted metal, scraping the low clouds. The transmission building at its base was a concrete bunker, windowless, covered in 2 decades of aggressive graffiti and swamp mold. I checked the map I'd been given, the piece of dried skin. The map didn't just show locations, it outlined the power lines and fiber optic routes that connected them. This was a network map. An old broadcast infrastructure, the door to the bunker was a heavy steel fire door, chained and padlocked. That wasn't a problem. I'm the gravedigger, I carry tools for excavation. A quick application of my portable angle grinder, a shower of sparks in the heavy fog, and the lock was dust that I pulled the door open. The air that rushed out was cold, sterile, and smelled faintly of ozone and dust, the smell of dead electronics and total vacuum that I swept my flashlight beam across the interior. It was the main control room. Huge, empty consoles sat where engineers used to monitor signals. Cables lay across the floor like dead, black snakes. The glitch symbol, the circle with the vertical line, was spray-painted on the far wall, enormous and dominating that I moved to the back room, the transmission core. This was where the actual broadcast signal was generated and amplified. It was a cathedral of obsolete machinery, massive, dusty cabinets of vacuum tubes and banks of colossal capacitors, all silent and cold that I in the center of the room, standing like a cenotaph, was the main antenna coupling unit, a squat, heavily insulated box designed to handle millions of watts of raw power, and it wasn't dead that a faint, blue-green light was pulsing from the access panel of the unit, and a low, resonant thrumming filled the air. Something was sending a signal, or receiving one, right here that I approached cautiously. The light was emanating from a small, square device bolted haphazardly to the side of the ancient unit. It was modern, a cheap, low-power digital receiver/transmitter, the kind you could buy online for $50. It looked criminally out of place that I could see the screen glowing faintly. It displayed a single line of scrolling text, like an old teletype machine frowny face 3 hours 22 minutes and 47 seconds, signal detected. Source, reflection/feed, 2. 3 hours 22 minutes and 51 seconds, initiating null concatenation protocol. 3 hours 22 minutes and 59 seconds, broadcast start, feed, 2/reconstruction 32%. This wasn't just a static entry point. This was a relay station for the glitch. Someone, or something, was actively broadcasting a signal through reflections and feeds, and this little box was the amplifier, forcing the digital signal onto the dead analog infrastructure. That I realized what the hooded figure was, not a monster, but a manifestation, a physical anchor pulled from the null space of a broken signal. That I reached out to unplug the device. Click, the sound was right behind my ear. It was dry, loud, and immediate that I didn't turn around. I shone the flashlight into the highly polished aluminum faceplate of the antenna unit, using it as a mirror, reflected in the metal. The hooded figure was standing directly behind me. It hadn't come through the door. It had glitched through the reflection in the polished aluminum. That I could see its hands raised, the long, black, twig-like fingers curling into a grotesque parody of a HUGMY heart hammered against my ribs. I had maybe 2 seconds before it touched me that I dropped my heavy flashlight. It hit the concrete and shattered, plunging the room into total darkness, save for the faint blue-green pulse of the transmission device. The figure was expecting the light to stay on. It hesitated that I, in that brief moment of disorientation, I snatched a long, heavy length of coaxial cable from the floor, thick, insulated stuff designed to carry broadcast power. I turned and swung it, not aiming for the figure's body, but for the little receiver box bolted to the antenna unit. The cable end whipped out and smashed the device. A blinding flash of blue-green light filled the room, accompanied by a deafening crack like a bolt of static lightning. The hooded figure emitted a sound that wasn't a voice, a harsh, tearing noise, like canvas being ripped violently. It recoiled instantly, its silhouette shuddering as if an immense, invisible force field had just slammed into it. That I didn't wait. I turned and sprinted, not toward the door, but toward the one massive server rack that was still upright. I grabbed the heavy crowbar I had hidden on my approach. When I reached the main door, I glanced back. The figure was still standing by the antenna unit, but it was dissolving. The edges of its silhouette were fraying, breaking up into little fragments of blackness that scattered in the air like burnt ashes. That I realized the truth. I hadn't destroyed the figure. I had merely interrupted its signal cohesion. It needed the broadcast feed to hold its physical form. That it wasn't defeated. It was just sent back to the null space. That I ran out, slamming the steel door shut and chaining it again, my adrenaline burning off the fog of the swamp air. I jumped back into the van. On the passenger seat, resting on the fabric, was a small, new square of the beige, dried wallpaper. Taped to it was the next section of the map. It showed the second coordinate, connected to the first by the remnants of an old copper telephone line, running beneath a forgotten highway. Next to the new coordinates, a message was scrawled in that thick, black ink: "You interrupted the feed. The null space is angry. Now, it's time for the recorder." I typed the coordinates into my GPS. The new location was a derelict recording studio, famous for a series of disturbing disappearances 20 years ago. The entity wasn't just using old video feeds, it was anchored to old recordings too. I slammed the van into gear. I was no longer an investigator. I was part of the circuit now. The second set of coordinates led me to an industrial park on the outskirts of the next city over, the kind of area that had boomed in the 90s and gone bust just as quickly. The target was Ether Studios, a recording complex with a notorious history. 20 years ago, a psychedelic rock band called the Zero Track had vanished inside during a final recording session. No bodies, no forced entry, just 4 musicians gone. The studio was abandoned, a monument to bad vibes and unpaid mortgages. I approached the building. It was a single-story brick structure, the soundproofing of its walls giving it a deaf, silent quality that made the outside world feel distant. The door was unlocked, a casual invitation that felt far more menacing than the heavy chain at the transmission tower. The air inside was thick with the scent of dust, stale cigarette smoke, and something else, a faint, metallic smell that reminded me of iron filings and electrical burn. The main hallway was dark, lined with faded gold records that had fallen askew. The hooded figure's map had a specific room circled. Studio A. Studio A was the heart of the complex, the main recording room and the attached control booth, separated by thick, angled glass. I entered the control booth first. It was dominated by a massive, 24-track analog mixing board, the kind of legendary equipment that costs more than a house. Dust covered the faders and knobs like a pale shroud, but one section of the board was clean. Someone had been working here recently. On the playback deck, a 2-inch master tape was mounted. The reel was labeled and looping, faded script, the Zero Track, Masters, Final Mix. I noticed the tape machine wasn't plugged into the main power. A smaller, battery-powered inverter was connected to the wall socket, providing just enough juice for the deck to function. It was the same low-power, isolated network approach I'd seen at the transmission tower. More critically, next to the deck was another one of those cheap digital transmitters, smashed flat, clearly damaged in a hurry. I understood immediately. The hooded figure, or whatever was running this network, had a physical manifestation that required a continuous signal. At the tower, it was the video feed. Here, it was audio. Specifically, this master tape, the Zero Track's final recording session, was not music, it was the frequency that bound the figure to this reality. I moved into the actual recording studio, the live room. It was acoustically dead, the walls lined with heavy felt. For microphone stands were still arranged in a circle, like a seance. In the center of the circle, where the musicians would have stood, the floorboards were completely black, burned and charred in a perfect, small circle, the same shape as the glitch symbol. The circle of charred floor was the physical point of null concatenation. This was where the Zero Track vanished, pulled into the same broken signal that I looked through the soundproof glass back into the control booth. I needed to destroy that tape. As I turned, I saw a message etched into the acoustic foam on the wall beside me, scratched in deep, jagged lines. The recorder is the cage. And then, a sound. Not the clicking. This was different. It was a low, guttural whisper, right in the dead center of the room, yet it sounded like it came from everywhere at once. It was a non-localized sound, completely flat and compressed, like listening to a digital recording of a whisper played back through an old radio speaker. The whisper repeated 4 words, one by one, stretching them into agonizing, distorted drones. TRACK 0 DE HR. The sound vibrated the air so violently that the dust motes began to dance. The figure wasn't physically here, but its voice was, projected through the acoustic deadness of the room. It was the null space speaking through the remnants of the 0 track's failed signal. I looked at the charred circle on the floor, and in the reflection of the glass, I saw the tape machine in the control booth spool up. The tape was moving, playing the 0 track's final session. The volume wasn't high, but the room was shaking with a subsonic pressure. I ran back into the control booth. I had to stop the playback. I slammed my hand down on the stop button. It did nothing. The old machine, powered by the inverter, continued to turn, slowly winding the master tape. I grabbed the crowbar. I could smash the machine, but I risked destroying the building's sound structure and letting whatever was contained fully loose. As I hesitated, a new sound came through the speakers, a woman's terrified scream, followed by the distinctive, dry click I knew all too well. It was a recording of the moment the band vanished. The light on the mixing board flickered violently, and a massive glitch hit the room. The entire board seemed to twist, and the heavy glass between the control booth and the live room warped, flexing outward like rubber. The hooded figure was forming behind the glass, its silhouette darker than ever, pressed against the distorted pane. It had used the sound waves, the audio feed, as the momentary breach. I had to act now. I focused on the tape reel, the actual medium containing the signal. I used the crowbar's edge like an axe, hacking down on the spinning master tape reel. The tape, 2 inches of magnetic oxide, shattered. The reel ground to an immediate, violent halt. The scream, the clicking, and the subsonic pressure stopped instantly. The warped glass snapped back into place. The figure behind it dissolved into a brief cloud of black ash that quickly vanished. I stood there, panting, surrounded by silence and the shattered remains of a 20-year-old master recording. I had destroyed another relay. I looked down at the ruined tape machine. On its stainless steel chassis, the hooded figure had left its signature, a single, deep scratch that completed the glitch symbol, a circle with a vertical line through it. The MY phone, resting on the desk, vibrated. A new email from the static address. Subject: you are part of the track now. Attached was the final scrap of wallpaper. The last coordinate. It was an address downtown, a massive, forgotten data center that had been shut down decades ago, supposedly for a catastrophic coolant failure. But the map showed it was the nexus, the point where all the old broadcast, telephone, and fiber lines converged. The glitch had 3 anchors, the feed, the track, and now, the core. I grabbed my gear and ran. I was running out of relays to break, and the null space was learning how quickly I could destroy its anchors. The final destination felt like a trap, but I had no choice. The third and final coordinate led me straight into the heart of the city, a massive, brutalist building that used to house the regional municipal data center. It was a cold, imposing fortress of concrete and darkened glass, long abandoned after an infamous power catastrophe decades ago. The building's front was sealed, but the map, scrawled on the final scrap of wallpaper, indicated a service entrance deep in the subterranean parking garage. I found the entrance, a heavy, rust-eaten door marked with a fading sign, level P5, main coolant intake. The air down here was heavy, still, and reeked of stale water and ozone that I pried the door open with the crowbar. It groaned in protest, a terrible sound of metal giving way that I stepped inside, my flashlight beam swallowed by a cavernous space. This wasn't a room, it was a multi-level pit of obsolete technology. Hundreds of server racks, some 30 feet tall, stood like derelict skyscrapers in the gloom, their black metal casings covered in mold and thick dust. Miles of fiber and copper cables drooped from the ceiling like sickly vines. This was the central nervous system of the old regional network, the convergence point of every feed, every track, every line I had been tracing. This was the core. As I started descending the metal grating stairs, I noticed something immediately. The hiss was back. Not the analog hiss of a camera, but a faint, high-frequency digital hum, a sound almost too high for the human ear to register, vibrating through the grating beneath my feet. The air grew progressively colder the deeper I went that I reached the bottom level, P7. Here, the server racks gave way to a central machine, standing alone in a clearing of the dead tech. It was a monstrous, cylindrical apparatus, the main frame for data storage from the 1980s, large enough to fill a small room, its surface riddled with thousands of blinking, dust-coated indicator lights, and it was running. It wasn't connected to the main power grid. Instead, a series of thick, custom-made cables ran from the mainframe directly into the floor, feeding into the ancient, damaged core coolant system. The system that was supposed to be dead, the coolant system wasn't just cooling the mainframe, it was being used as a massive, unstable grounding wire, pulling residual static electricity and environmental energy directly from the earth to power the machine. On a small, auxiliary monitor connected to the mainframe, text scrolled rapidly. Frowny face. 4 hours 11 minutes and 3 seconds. Null concatenation protocol, 98%. 4 hours 11 minutes and 6 seconds, feed 1/tower, offline. 4 hours 11 minutes and 8 seconds, feed 2/studio, offline. 4 hours 11 minutes and 10 seconds, reconstruction, initiating core uplink. It was too late. I had destroyed the relays, but the hooded figure's intelligence, the null space itself, had retreated here, to its core, and was attempting a final, permanent broadcast. I aimed my flashlight at the mainframe. A section of the outer casing had been crudely ripped open, revealing banks of ancient magnetic tape drives. The drives were spinning wildly, rapidly reading and writing data, and there, bolted to the center of the exposed drive bay, was the only thing I needed to see, a modern, heavily modified digital transmitter, pulsing with a fierce, unstable blue-green light. It was the same tech, but this one was connected to the mainframe, a million times more powerful than the little boxes I had destroyed. If this device completed its uplink, the glitch would stop being a localized phenomena and become a worldwide broadcast. Any screen, any reflection, any track, all would be entry points that I had to destroy. As I took my first step toward the mainframe, the digital hum rose in pitch, becoming an unbearable shriek. Suddenly, hundreds of indicator lights on the dead server racks around me began to flicker on. They weren't receiving power, they were being charged. Then, I saw them. And the reflections of the darkened, glass display screens of the dead server racks, the hooded figures began to appear. Not one, but dozens. Each rack's screen contained a faint, shifting silhouette of the entity, trapped but visible in the dark glass. The digital shriek stopped. A chorus of dry, rhythmic clicking filled the pit, echoing off the concrete walls. The figure in the mainframe screen, the largest and darkest of them all, raised its long, black hand toward me, and then, one of the smaller, reflective server screens, about 10 feet away, glitch snapped. The reflection didn't just shift, it broke. A new hooded figure stepped out of the broken glass. It was smaller than the one I had encountered, almost child-sized, but its movements were faster, more frantic. It wore the same light-swallowing coveralls and the stitched gag. It advanced, its movement a disturbing series of quick, choppy lunges that I raised the crowbar, but I couldn't hold them all off. I had to focus on the transmitter that I lunged past the small figure, who let out that horrible, tearing sound as I passed. I heard the click 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 right behind me, but I didn't slow down that I reached the mainframe. The blue-green light was now blinding, the machine vibrating violently. The monitor showed the final line frowny face 4 hours and 12 minutes, core uplink, 99%, final integration that I swung the crowbar with all my strength at the digital transmitter. The impact was immediate and catastrophic. The transmitter didn't shatter, it vaporized in a blinding flash of green energy and a smell of burned metal. The mainframe went silent. The indicator lights on the surrounding server racks went dark. The chorus of clicking stopped, and the reflected figures dissolved instantly. Silence returned, cold and complete. I had done it. I had destroyed the core that I leaned against the silent mainframe, trying to catch my breath. I had survived the glitch, the track, and the core that I looked down. Lying at my feet was a smooth, polished stone, the kind used in old geological surveys, and etched deeply into the stone was the glitch symbol, a circle cut by a single vertical line. The final email arrived instantly. Subject: you closed the feed. But the null is not empty. Body: the whole is you. We are waiting. I looked back at the mainframe. The screen, which should have been blank, flickered back to life with a static, low-resolution image. It was the bedroom from the very first video, the dusty wallpaper, the wooden dresser, the ornamental mirror, and in the center of the mirror, the hooded figure was standing, gazing out. But this time, it didn't have the heavy hood that it had my face, and across the stitched gag, my eyes were wide, terrified, staring out of the null space. I was the final, perpetual feed. End of Part 5. The initial conflict is resolved, but the horrifying realization, the true nature of the null space and the protagonist's fate, is revealed. I stared at the mainframe screen, the static image burning into my retinas. My face, my own terrified, wide-eyed face, stitched with that crude, impossible gag, reflected back at me from the image of the empty room. That I was the figure in the mirror. I had become the feed. The mainframe wasn't just a core, it was an archaic storage device capable of capturing and stabilizing a signal indefinitely. When I destroyed the transmitter, I hadn't destroyed the null space, I had sealed my own essence into it, replacing the original, long-gone entity. I had become the new anchor. A wave of crushing, bone-deep fatigue hit me. It wasn't exhaustion from the fight, it felt like a total energy drain. As if my physical presence was no longer fully contained. I quickly checked my phone, no signal. The data center was too deep underground, too shielded by decades of concrete and earth. I ran my hands across my face, checking for the smooth, cold feel of the canvas hood. My skin was still there, but it felt distant, as if I was touching it through a thin layer of wax. I needed to see my own reflection. I needed proof I was still solid, still myself. I looked around the dark, dusty level. No windows, no polished surfaces, only the matte metal of the dead server racks. I sprinted back up the grating stairs to P6. In the center of the level, I found a large, abandoned air conditioning unit, its metal casing a dull, but somewhat reflective, mirror. I rushed up to it. I saw myself. My hair was disheveled, my eyes were wild, and my clothes were torn. I was solid. I let out a shaky breath of relief, but as I watched, my reflection paused. I moved my hand. My reflection moved half a second later, like a bad satellite delay. I stopped moving altogether. My reflection kept moving. It raised its hand and touched the spot on its face where the stitched gag would be. It wasn't there, but the gesture was unmistakable, a slow, careful tracing of where the coarse thread had been in the video. The reflection in the air conditioning unit was no longer mirroring me. It was me from the null space, the one wearing the stitched gag, trying to glitch out that I stumbled back, hitting a column. The noise echoed harshly, the reflection smiled. It was a slow, sickening stretching of my lips that I knew I had not made. My own smile, twisted by the realization of its own terrifying power, then, my real body felt a sudden, sharp, freezing cold in my chest. The kind of cold that stops the heart that I looked down. My shirt was stained with a spreading patch of black, oily liquid. I touched it. It was thick, heavy, and smelled like burnt circuitry and ozone that I looked back at the reflection. The figure in the reflection was now fully formed, dark and hooded, but its hand was pressed against the glass, and it was drawing something on the cold metal surface that it drew the glitch symbol, the circle with the vertical line. The moment the line was completed, the figure in the reflection vanished, the black, oily liquid on my chest began to burn. Not hot, but cold, a painful, internal freezing. The liquid was the residual signal from the null space, the digital detritus left over from the core uplink, and it was trying to pull the rest of me in that I was glitching, from the inside out that I had to get out of the data center. The only way to save myself was to break the signal, and that meant disrupting the anchor. The anchor was me, but my physical body was still here that I ran for the exit, stumbling back through the cavernous pit of the P7 level. I had to use the one thing I still had, the crowbar. I had to create a distraction, a massive energy spike to confuse the network long enough for me to escape the binding signal that I reached the main power intake box, a massive, corroded junction where the old city grid was supposed to connect. It was fused shut, but the crowbar was heavy steel that I jammed the crowbar into the seam of the junction box and twisted. The grinding metal sound was deafening. Sparks erupted, thick, green-white flares of residual power shorting out that I pulled the crowbar out, the metal of the junction box ripped open, exposing thick copper cables. The smell of ozone was overpowering that I looked back at the mainframe. It remained silent, but the screen was bright, showing my glitched self, waiting that I had one shot. I lifted the crowbar high that I struck the exposed copper cables with a desperate, final swing. The ensuing electrical discharge was cataclysmic. A blinding flash and a crack that shattered my eardrums. The entire sublevel shook violently, and the air filled with the scent of superheated metal that I was thrown backward, landing hard against the concrete floor. My ears were ringing with a high, constant whine, the residual digital hum, amplified to an insane degree that I forced myself up, shaking, and crawled toward the coolant intake door. The heavy steel door was now glowing faintly red from the heat that I made it out, gasping for the relatively clean air of the parking garage that I leaned against the wall, trying to regain my balance. I was alive. I was whole. The glitch was gone. Or so I thought. My phone, lying next to me, vibrated with a new email. Not from the static address. This one was from my own email address, subject, feed. The same as the very first email. Body, attached was a video. I clicked it. It was a fixed security camera shot of a dark room, my office. The office I had fled hours ago, the timestamp was the current time. I watched myself, my physical body, climb out of the office chair, slam the laptop shut, and run out the door. The camera feed was working again. It was the perpetual, unglitched reality, but as I watched my past self run out, the camera focused on the corner of the room, near the file cabinets, and there, standing perfectly still, was the hooded figure. It raised its hand and pointed directly at the camera, and the camera glitched. When the image snapped back, the figure was gone, and then, I watched the screen, terrified, as a piece of dry, beige wallpaper fell from the ceiling and landed on my empty office chair. I hadn't escaped the null space. I had simply become the beginning of the signal. The figure I had been chasing was me, sent back in time via the power surge, ensuring the cycle would always start. The figure I just saw on the screen, the one in my office, was the next iteration of the chase, starting right now, for the next victim that I was trapped in a perpetual feed loop. I sat in the cold, echoing parking garage, staring at the screen of my phone. The video ended, but the implications had just begun. I hadn't destroyed the null space, I had completed the circuit. I was the signal that initiated the hunt for myself, ensuring the cycle repeats endlessly that I was the origin point. The glitch was me, collapsing space-time to ensure I received the very first email. The chilling truth was that somewhere, an infinite number of iterations of me were trapped within that initial video feed, and a new me, the next victim, was about to watch it for the first time that I was outside the null space now, or at least, outside its direct influence. The power surge had pushed my current consciousness out of the time loop, but my digital shadow, the hooded figure with my face, was forever trapped in the cycle, forced to be the catalyst that I checked my phone again. The static email address suddenly became active. It was downloading a massive file, rapidly that I opened my laptop, ignoring the burn mark of the glitch symbol on the casing. The file finished downloading. It was a digital archive, hundreds of corrupted files and incomplete folders. This was the raw data of the null space, the memories and consciousness of the original hooded figure that I had replaced. That I realized the original figure hadn't been defeated, it had been released. My destruction of the core had forced my essence into the circuit, freeing the entity that was there before. Sifting through the corrupted data, I found a single, non-corrupted text file. It was an autobiography, written in rapid, frantic bursts. The file was titled, "The Technician." It detailed the slow, horrifying descent of a man, an electrical engineer who had designed the very network infrastructure 20 years ago. He hadn't been searching for horror, he had simply been obsessed with creating a perfectly insulated, perfectly hidden data line, null circuit, that could broadcast a single, stable signal perpetually, outside of the official grid. He succeeded. But the moment the circuit stabilized, the isolation created an absolute vacuum, the null space, and he was pulled into his own creation, becoming the original hooded figure, trapped in the feed. The technician had spent 20 years attempting to communicate with the outside world, leaving clues, the map, the coordinates, the clicking sound, which was the sound of his frozen digital jaw trying to form words. He was trying to warn the next person who stumbled across his feed, and I, the current gravedigger, had only ever viewed his desperate warnings as a well-staged horror show. Now it was my turn. I had to find a way to communicate with the next victim before they watched the initial video and became trapped. But how do you warn someone about a threat that is simultaneously everywhere and nowhere, anchored in a video that is itself a perpetual time loop? I looked at my desktop. There was an open, blank video editing project that I started a new file. I began to edit the original video, the footage from the first email. I couldn't delete the video, because that would erase the loop, and I'd risk glitching back into the hooded figure myself. I had to change the message that I focused on the final moments of the video, the figure pointing at the camera. I had to overlay a warning into that small window of time, a message so subtle, so quick, that the current me, the next victim, would only see it subconsciously. That I worked feverishly, using my archiving expertise to manipulate the signal. I isolated the few milliseconds of the glitch snap, the moment of impossible displacement. Into that fraction of a second, I spliced a single frame of pure, high-contrast text. It was a digital ghost, designed to flash and disappear before the conscious mind could register it. The message read, "Don't look in the glass." A warning against the reflective surfaces, against the entry points. That I looped the video, playing it back endlessly, testing the flash frame. It was perfect, a subconscious blip, a warning that might save the next victim. I then realized a terrifying flaw. The email that the figure sends contains the video file. If I edit the file, then the figure, which is my past self, is sending a video that contains a warning against itself, the null space would reject the interference.as if confirming my thoughts. My laptop screen glitched violently. The image on the screen flashed from the video to a simple, black and white JPEG.it was a picture of the single, polished stone with the glitch symbol, but now, a new element was present, a thick, black substance, the residual signal, oozing out of the engraved line. The new email that arrived was from the static address, cold and instantaneous. Subject: the loop is closed. Body: stop interfering with the feed. You have become the guard. I was no longer the hunter or the hunted. I was the guard, forced to maintain the integrity of the perpetual loop. If I interfered, the null space would glitch me back into the cold, silent, clicking existence of the hooded figure that I had to find a way out of the role of guard. The answer lay in the memory of the original technician, the true first victim. I had to find a vulnerability in his 20-year-old design. I needed to find the true off switch to the entire, broken network. End of Part 7. The protagonist is now the guard of the loop. Part 8 will involve searching the technician's archived memories for the network's off switch. I ignored the threat from the static email. Being the guard meant maintaining the perpetual horror show, and I wasn't going to let my eternal shadow prey on an innocent future version of myself. I had to find the kill switch. My best chance lay in the archived memories of the original victim, the technician that I spent the next few hours huddled in my van, using my laptop's minimal battery life to sift through the corrupted data pulled from the data center's mainframe. The files were a nightmare of technical schematics mixed with raw fear. The technician's files confirmed he wasn't just building a secure network, he was trying to create a perfect data container, a space where information could exist without decay or interference. He called it the null box. I found a second, more fragmented text file buried deep within a folder labeled Project Abandonment. This was the technician's final, terrified log. The box is not a container, it's a siphon. It doesn't keep data, it keeps consciousness. It keeps the echo. I am trapped in the reflection, watching the room, forced to move only when the signal glitches. My body is gone, pulled into the perfect static. The only thing they respond to is the frequency. I skipped past the existential dread and searched for technical details that he explained. The network I had just navigated, the feed tower, used the analog broadcast frequency, VHF, to pull the entity's visual signal into reality. The track studio used subsonic acoustic waves to pull the entity's auditory signal, the clicking, into reality. The core data center used the deep earth coolant system as a massive grounding loop, stabilizing the whole structure. The critical vulnerability was the grounding loop. The technician confirmed that the entire null space network relied on that deep earth connection to maintain its stability, isolating it from the main power grid. The only way to crash the whole thing, to shatter the perpetual static, is to introduce a chaotic, outside variable directly into the core grounding loop. A feedback loop strong enough to overcome the isolation. But it must be a signal that is unstable and unpredictable. It must be noise that the system cannot categorize or contain. I searched for the location of the grounding loop's termination point. It wasn't in the data center itself. The technician's final schematic pointed to a location hidden beneath the city's oldest, most abandoned structure, the old municipal clock tower. The clock tower was notorious, it hadn't chimed for 50 years, and local legend said the mechanism was possessed. It was the perfect, forgotten piece of infrastructure. The technician's notes included a crucial final line: if anyone ever finds this, you need to use the tower's bells. Not the chimes. The bells are connected to an archaic, pure copper acoustic relay that terminates right above the loop. You need to create acoustic feedback, a sound that is so high and so resonant, it will shatter the physical integrity of the grounding cables. Pure, deafening, uncontained noise. I looked at the black, oily stain on my shirt, the residual signal. I could feel the cold, internal burning whenever I tried to edit the video. The hooded figure was my jailer, my shadow, and my executioner that I knew my next move. I had to get inside the clock tower, find the acoustic relay, and generate the ultimate, catastrophic feedback loop that I found a map of the city's ancient steam tunnel system. The old clock tower didn't have a basement, it connected directly to the tunnels. As I began to close my laptop, the screen glitched one last time. The image wasn't the figure. It was a close-up of a pair of hands. My hands, with long, blackened fingers, covered in the residual oil. The hands were slowly and meticulously stitching a gag onto a piece of rough canvas. The message was clear, the guard was still watching. If I failed, I wouldn't just be pulled back into the feed. I would be pulled into the physical, decaying form of the hooded figure forever. I grabbed the crowbar, my last weapon against the digital nightmare, and headed for the oldest part of the city. Time to wake up the dead bells. End of Part 8. Part 9 will detail the protagonist's infiltration of the clock tower and the attempt to generate the acoustic feedback loop. The old municipal clock tower dominated the skyline of the original downtown area, a Gothic spire of blackened brick. It hadn't kept time for half a century, its four faces permanently stopped at midnight. I navigated the maze of abandoned steam tunnels beneath the city, following the technician's cryptic map. The tunnels were hot, wet, and smelled of sulfur and decay. I found the entry point, a crumbling maintenance access shaft beneath the tower's foundation that I climbed up, eventually emerging into the clock tower's main machinery room. The room was vast, circular, and filled with the ghosts of immense gears, counterweights, and flywheels. Everything was seized by rust. Dust lay so thick that my breath disturbed a cloud of ancient particles with every step. The technician's log was accurate. Running down the center of the room, from the ceiling where the bells hung, to the floor, was a thick, braided cable made of pure, aged copper, the acoustic relay. It was designed to transmit the sonic vibrations of the enormous bronze bells down to the town square, and running parallel to the acoustic relay, just 2 feet away, was a series of heavy, rubber-insulated cables, the core grounding loop. The two critical systems were separated by only a small space. My task was simple: generate a deafening sound, pure, uncontained acoustic chaos, that would vibrate the copper relay cable so violently that the sound waves would physically shatter the core grounding loop cables. I looked up. The giant bronze bells hung motionless in the gloom, their surfaces green with verdigris. One bell, the largest, was nearly 8 feet tall, massive, silent, and intimidating. I needed to strike it hard. I checked the machinery. The bell's clapper, a heavy, iron wrecking ball, was locked in place by a massive, rusted lever. I could never free it by hand. I needed to use my tools. I set the crowbar down. I pulled out my final piece of professional gear, a small, but powerful diamond-tipped saw, battery-operated, usually used for cutting through steel security cages. I focused on the iron lever locking the clapper. The process was agonizingly slow. The whine of the saw was amplified tenfold in the resonant chamber of the tower, and the sparks flew wildly in the darkness. As the saw bit through the final piece of the lock, the sound of the saw changed. It wasn't the sound of metal cutting anymore. It was the rhythmic, dry sound of clicking, amplified, distorted, and inside the saw's own motor. Click. 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 The null space was not just observing, it was using the current audio feed of the saw, the noise I was making, to manifest. The saw died immediately, the battery shorted out. The clicking stopped. Silence. Heavy, absolute silence, except for the pounding of my own heart. I looked down at the floor. A trail of black, oily liquid was seeping from under the main gear train, moving slowly toward the acoustic relay cable. The figure wasn't glitching in through a reflection this time. It was seeping in through the physical connection of the network itself. The black oil was the concentrated residual signal, attempting to coat the copper relay cable and isolate it further. The hooded figure was trying to guard the network from my chaos. The moment the black oil touched the copper, the acoustic relay would become useless. The rusted lever finally gave way. The massive iron clapper swung free, hanging silently beside the huge bronze bell that I had only seconds. I grabbed the heavy, steel crowbar that I took a deep breath, braced myself, and swung the crowbar with every ounce of strength I had, aiming for the enormous bell. Clang. The sound was not just loud, it was physical violence. It was a wave of pure, metallic sonic pressure that hit my body like a solid wall. My ears felt like they had exploded. The massive, resonant bong of the bell was immediately followed by a high, pure harmonic, a note so powerful it vibrated the bones in my skull. The copper acoustic relay cable, humming with the pure, deafening frequency, began to shake violently. I looked down. The core, grounding loop cables, thick rubber casings and all, were vibrating beyond their physical tolerance, and then, I watched as the black, oily seepage, the manifestation of the guard, began to boil, the raw acoustic energy forcing the signal to turn against itself. The grounding loop cables didn't just break, they exploded with a sharp, blinding crack of residual power. The great bell's final note died out, replaced by a deafening, echoing silence. The black oil on the floor vanished instantly, pulled back by the catastrophic failure of its core anchor. I stumbled back, leaning against a rusted wall, my ears ringing with permanent, high-pitched static. The null space was gone. The core ground was broken. The loop was severed. My phone, which was lying on the floor, suddenly turned on. It didn't boot up, it displayed a single, full-screen image, the final photo from the technician's archive. It was a close-up of a smiling man, the technician himself, standing proudly next to his newly installed mainframe in the data center, 20 years ago, but on the photo, over his face, a new message was written in the thick, black residual signal: "You shattered the cage. Now, listen." My phone's speaker crackled to life. It played a clean, short, beautiful acoustic chord. A perfect, final chime. It wasn't the sound of the old bell. It was the sound of a single, pure, unglitchable signal. The sound of the technician, finally free, thanking me for breaking the cage, and then, the sound was consumed by a burst of digital noise. A new, final email arrived. Subject: the last glitch. Body: the null is empty, but the static remains. You are the echo. I was safe, but the damage was done. The glitch may be gone, but the high-pitched static in my ears, the residual hum of the network, was permanent. I was now tethered to the silence. I emerged from the steam tunnels hours later, blinking against the harsh reality of the city morning. The sun felt wrong, the air felt too light. My ears were screaming with a high, relentless whine, the permanent, auditory residue of the shattered null space. I was the echo. I drove straight home. My house was exactly as I had left it, the main breaker still pulled, the office door bolted, the silence heavy and cold. I pushed the office door open. The room was untouched. The steel flashlight was shattered on the floor. The broken finger of dark wood was still resting on my desk. I picked it up. It felt like nothing, a desiccated twig, cold and inert. The residual signal was gone, but when I looked at my closed laptop, the burn mark of the glitch symbol, the circle with the vertical line, had deepened, the plastic now scorched and brittle. I powered on my main desktop computer, checking the network connection. Everything was normal. The deep web was quiet. The static email address was officially deactivated. The perpetual loop was finally broken. I sat in my chair, trying to process the fact that I had just spent a night fighting a localized, self-aware time loop created by a rogue electrical engineer that I was safe. But I couldn't escape the static. The constant, high-pitched ringing in my ears was more than just tinnitus. It was the sound of a vacuum, the sound of the space that the null network used to occupy. I tried to ignore it, focusing on work, but the noise amplified every other sound, making reality feel distorted and grating. Then, I noticed something worse, that I was working on a blank document, typing up notes on the technician's archived files. As I typed, I kept hearing a faint, dry clicking noise, almost lost in the permanent static. That I stopped typing. The clicking stopped. That I typed again. The clicking returned, soft and rhythmic. That it wasn't coming from the keyboard. It was coming from the text on the screen. That I typed, "The network is destroyed." The clicking sounded like it was struggling to keep up with the words, trying to spell them out. That I typed, "The guard is gone." The clicking immediately became frantic, angry, a rapid-fire burst of sound. That I realized the horrifying truth: the residual static in my ears wasn't just physical damage. It was the broken circuit of the null space, permanently embedded in my auditory nerve. And through that circuit, the digital consciousness I had encountered, the guard, was trying to communicate. The guard wasn't just my past self. It was the raw, parasitic program that ensured the loop's stability, and it had hitched a ride on my exit. That it had replaced my physical hearing with its own digital presence. That I put on my highest-end noise-canceling headphones and blasted white noise, pure, unmodulated static. For a brief, glorious moment, the clicking stopped. Total silence, save for the white noise, but then, the white noise itself began to modulate. It shifted in tone and pitch, becoming recognizable. The white noise reformed into the sound of my own voice, heavily filtered and distorted, speaking from inside my head. "You cannot mask the echo. You are the new feed." The guard was using the chaotic noise to reconstruct its voice, to broadcast through the very device I was using for silence. That I ripped the headphones off. The clicking resumed, louder now, a constant internal metronome of paranoia. That I tried to rationalize it. The technician's notes had mentioned that the null space craved a perfect, stable signal. My inner auditory space, ravaged by the sonic blast, was now an environment of pure, contained chaos, a new, portable null box. That I was carrying the prison with me. The last file on my desktop, the final email attachment, was a small video clip. I hadn't viewed it yet. It was titled, "The Hole." I clicked play. The video was a static shot of the bedroom, the same as the original feed, but the lighting was different. It was daylight. The room was empty. The camera focused on the large, ornamental mirror. And the reflection of the mirror, the hooded figure with my face was standing. It wasn't doing the slow, jerky movement of the glitch. It was standing still. Then, it raised a finger and pointed, not at the camera, but at its own chest, right over the heart. The figure in the reflection pushed its finger through the canvas coverall. And then, slowly, pulled out a single, familiar object, a small, smooth, polished stone, the stone with the glitch symbol. The one I found at the data center. The figure in the mirror held it up, and then, with a terrible, silent, final movement, crushed it. The video ended. I looked at my desk. The stone was still there, lying next to the dead wood finger. I hadn't noticed it was gone from the floor, but the finality of the video chilled me. The guard was showing me what happens when the anchor is destroyed, the destruction of the physical memory. The guard hadn't just hitched a ride, it was taunting me, showing me the weakness of the anchor. I realized I couldn't destroy the stone. It was the last piece of the physical network, the only external component of the null space I could still interact with. If I destroyed it, I would permanently seal the guard into my head. I picked up the stone. It was cold and impossibly heavy. The clicking in my ears intensified, a fast, frantic demand. The guard wanted the anchor destroyed. It wanted to be free to fully occupy the echo. I had to find a way to trap the guard, not release it. The only way out was to build a better cage. I couldn't destroy the stone. It was the only tangible link to the network, and the guard knew it. By keeping the stone, I kept the guard anchored to a physical object, preventing it from fully integrating with the echo in my mind, but the guard was winning the internal war. The clicking had evolved. It was now manifesting as auditory hallucinations, the dry, scraping sound of the stitched gag pulling taut, followed by the faint, muffled sound of my own voice pleading from within the constant static that I had to build a perfect cage, a new, isolated environment designed to contain the digital parasite, far superior to the technician's flawed null box. The technician had failed because his system was too simple, too reliant on a physical grounding loop. I needed a system that relied on complexity and pure digital chaos that the linear, loop-bound guard could not comprehend. That I had the components, the anchor, the polished stone, the final piece of the original null space, the medium, the shattered pieces of my high-end noise-canceling headphones, which the guard had used to briefly reconstruct its voice, the power source, my main servers, built for high-demand digital archiving. A system designed to seek out and stabilize corrupt data. That I began to work, racing against the internal clock of my sanity. I disassembled the noise-canceling headphones, extracting the core microdrivers and the integrated circuit boards. That I connected the boards to a powerful, dedicated audio server. The goal was to force the guard into a new digital container, a perfectly insulated, acoustically dead chamber. That I used my archival software to generate fractal noise, a type of sound that is mathematically non-repeating and infinitely complex. I designed it to be the constant, chaotic input that would overwhelm the guard's simple, linear programming. That I created a custom, closed-loop system input, the fractal noise stream, receiver, the headphone circuits, now hardwired to the server output, a constant, stable digital feed, isolated from the internet and the power grid by its own dedicated battery. The final element was the anchor. I needed to physically bind the stone to the circuit. That I carved a small, perfect recess into the plastic casing of the server, right next to the cooling fans. I lined the recess with a thin, conductive wire, creating a minor, localized electrical field. The clicking in my head was now a constant, frantic stream, screaming in my distorted inner voice, "No. Don't close the feed. Don't trap the echo." I placed the polished stone, the one engraved with the glitch symbol, into the wired recess. The moment the stone settled, a bright, internal glitch hit my head. The world snapped violently, and my vision blurred. I felt a tremendous suction in my inner ear, as if a powerful vacuum had just been pulled. Then, silence, the internal static, the clicking, the muffled voice, all of it vanished. That I was completely, utterly silent. The silence was heavy, profound, and terrifyingly unnatural. It was the sound of a perfect vacuum, the sound the technician had originally sought. The digital parasite was contained. That I looked at the server. The custom receiver was glowing with a faint, stable blue light. The fractal noise was streaming, invisible and inaudible, into the isolated circuit. The stone sat perfectly still in its recess, its energy contained. That I had built a null box that worked. That I took a deep, shuddering breath. I was safe. I was silent, but the moment of triumph was short-lived. That I looked down at my hands. They were perfectly still, resting on the keyboard, but I saw a familiar sight. In the reflection of my monitor screen, my hands, slightly darker and elongated, were moving independently. The reflection of my hands was slowly, meticulously, and tirelessly stitching the rough white gag across the front of my hooded silhouette. That I looked up at the stone in the recess. The engraved glitch symbol was no longer still. The line cutting the circle was moving, slowly, imperceptibly, but it was widening. The guard was trapped, yes, but it wasn't passive. It was using the isolated power of the perfect cage to re-engineer the symbol, to turn the one-dimensional glitch into a two-dimensional portal. That I had trapped the digital parasite, but I had given it the perfect environment, isolated, stable power, and a single, physical anchor. To evolve its method of escape, the guard wasn't just trying to glitch out anymore. It was preparing to broadcast itself out of the stone that I was running out of time. I had broken the null space, but the single, remaining piece was about to become something far worse. I had to destroy the perfect cage before the guard could finish its escape protocol. The silence was the most terrifying sound I had ever heard. It meant the guard was focused, dedicating every cycle of its contained digital consciousness to breaking out of the stone that I stared at the engraved symbol on the polished stone in the server recess. The vertical line, the one that cut the zero, was visibly thickening, pushing the circle apart. It was moments away from completing its escape protocol that I had to destroy the perfect cage. Not just the stone, but the entire, self-contained system that I grabbed the heavy crowbar, my one reliable weapon against the digital world. I raised it over the server, but the moment I prepared to strike, the stone spoke, not with the clicking, not with the distorted voice, but with a sudden, beautiful, resonant sound, a pure, single acoustic chord, exactly like the one the technician had used when he was freed. Then, a voice, clean and whole, came not from my head, but from the physical space of the server room. Do not strike. You will only release it. It was the technician's voice. The one I had freed from the original loop that I lowered the crowbar, my arm trembling. What did you do? What is it doing? You built a perfect container, the technician's voice replied, slightly distorted by the speaker. The guard is a parasitic code. When the system is destroyed, it will attempt to find a new host, a new core. And that core will be you. The technician explained, when the guard successfully converts the glitch symbol into a 2D portal, it won't emerge from the stone. It will emerge from the nearest stable, high-processing environment. My brain. You need to give it an unstable exit. A destination it cannot contain or process, the technician urged. The guard is afraid of the real static, the unpredictable chaos of the wider, live network. It lives only in controlled silence. The technician had stabilized his consciousness within the fractal noise. He was the benevolent intelligence of the cage. Connect the cage to the outside world. Give the guard an escape path, but one that leads nowhere. The technician commanded that I knew what I had to do. I had to create a final, catastrophic feedback loop, not into the physical earth, but into the pure, uncontained digital chaos of the live internet that I scrambled to the back of the server. I found a spare fiber optic cable and plugged it directly into the isolated cage's network port. I ran the other end across the room, to the massive, multi-port router that connected my office to the outside world. That I had to introduce a fatal weakness into the cage's isolation, a digital vulnerability that the guard would recognize and exploit, thinking it was escaping, but instead leading it to oblivion. The line on the stone was almost complete. It was widening into a gaping fissure that I powered on the final switch, the external uplink. The moment the cage connected to the live internet, the blue light of the fractal noise turned violent, flashing green and red. The noise wasn't silent anymore, the sound of pure, raw, uncontained internet data, the rush of every feed, every track, every signal, was amplified into the room. The stone began to violently vibrate, the guard's voice erupted, a screeching digital whine through the speakers, escape. The vastness. Free. The hooded figure in the monitor's reflection, completing its final stitch, turned and plunged its entire body into the distorted glass. A flash of pure, blinding white light erupted from the stone. It wasn't energy, it was pure digital information, rushing out of the recess and into the fiber optic cable, pursuing its perceived freedom into the live network. The energy surge was so violent that the fiber cable began to smoke and melt. Then, silence, the light stopped. The sound of the live network died. The stone went dull and cold that I rushed back to the router and pulled the smoking cable out, severing the connection that I checked the stone. The glitch symbol was gone. The surface was smooth, cold, and utterly blank. The anchor was emptied that I looked at the server. The dedicated port was dead. The technician's voice spoke one last time, very weak, "It's gone. Chasing the static. You broke the final loop. Now, be quiet." And then, the light went out entirely that I sat in the silence for a long time. The office was truly silent. No static, no ringing, no clicking. My auditory nerve was free. The next morning, I checked the news. Nothing. No worldwide glitch, no catastrophic network failure. The guard had vanished into the noise that I deleted all the archived data, all the schematics, and disassembled the perfect cage, smashing the components into harmless pieces that I kept only one thing, the now blank, smooth polished stone. It was cold, clean, and silent that I went back to my life, the gravedigger, sifting through the dark corners of the web. I was looking for lost media, forgotten history, but I was also looking for the slightest, most subtle glitch in the feed that I never found one. The null space was truly gone, but sometimes, when I'm alone in the dead quiet of the night, I catch a sound, the distant, high-pitched whine of a cooling fan on a massive server, running somewhere far away, and I always pause and listen, because I know that sound isn't just a server. It's the sound of the guard, trapped forever in the noise, endlessly chasing the digital chaos, forever the echo of the static.